So norms for today, just a little to give you a little idea. I am always happy to be stopped mid-talk with questions. We certainly have left time for questions at the end, but you're going to hear Kelly and I kind of engage in some dialogue around this idea of executive functioning and specifically executive functioning in STEM and engineering classes. And the chat should be open. You should be able to get that. You can also raise your hand and you can speak to us directly. So we encourage you to do that. Thank you, David, for letting me know it's disabled. And we will get ourselves moving here. There we go. So I'm going to pose a question to you, and I want you to, this is why I need the chat functional. I want you to think very briefly, how do you make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich? And I promise this is relevant, but how do you make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich? So you can use the chat, you can chime in and give us some of those instructions. But for those of you who have been in science classes, a lot of times this is one of those things that we often will pose to students when we're thinking about asking them how they write up a lab report, right? We'll ask them, how do you make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich? Give me the directions, right? And so how do you do that, right? What does it look like? Well, if you ask the Google, which, sometimes we want to ask Google, Google will tell you, that there's very simple directions. Spread the peanut butter on one piece of bread, spread the jelly on the other, put the two pieces of bread together to form a sandwich. But there's a lot of things that are going unstated in that sentence, in that recipe. And so Kelly's going to talk a little bit about what it looks like to think through all of the steps of actually making a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Oop, there they go.
So as you can see, our directions have times by 5. We've now gone from 3 steps to 15 steps because it is not simply a thing of we're getting our bread and we're putting the peanut butter and the jelly on it. How are you getting the peanut butter from the cabinet? Where are you getting the bread? Do you have a knife? Are you putting your sandwich directly on your countertop? Are you putting on a paper towel, a plate? What are you using to scoop out your ingredients with? Are you putting the things away when you're done? How are you cutting your sandwich? It's not just as simple as bread, jelly, peanut butter, close it up, eat it up.
Yeah. And so I think, Kelly, that takes us right into kind of what the crux of today's workshop is about, or webinar is about, is that we're talking about executive functioning. So since this is your domain, can you give us kind of this definition of like, what do we mean when we talk about executive functioning?
So as you guys can see, it is quite literally just a set of skills that help you get things done. It helps with our planning. It helps with tasks. It helps with regulating your emotions, specifically regulating your emotions because you're more able to complete various tasks throughout your day without them being a surprise, without it becoming a thing of, what am I doing? Where am I supposed to be? I'm not finished with this. And one thing that can actually occur with people who do not have these skills very well set in place can be task paralysis, where it looks like they're just sitting and doing nothing, when in actuality, they don't know where to start. They don't know where to go. They don't remember what the task is, and they might be too anxious to ask for help.
Yeah, just sort of that, where do I even go from here? How do I even start what I'm supposed to be doing? It's the overwhelm, right? Of how do I organize this task? Yeah. So let's break these down into the kind of 3 key components that we're talking about here, which is working memory, mental flexibility, and self-control. And Kelly's going to lead us through that. Oops.
So we're
slide there. There we go.
Let's move to working memory. We're going to remember we're skipping to it.
Yeah.
Working memory is essentially, it's your short-term memory. It's that thought of, okay, I have these 3 tasks I'm going to do, like making peanut butter and jelly. You're remembering, I want to go get my peanut butter, then my jelly. Then I'm going to put it on the sandwich, and every step in between that. The
Yeah.
difficulty with working memory is you don't, those steps might disappear, and you might not remember where you were, especially if you've gotten a phone call as an adult and all of a sudden you're going, what was I doing? You have to regroup. But
Yeah.
it can also be, as you can see, specifically seeing numbers in your head. I'm one of those people that has to do that when you're doing math, that I struggle with math, but I can see the numbers as I'm doing them. And it very much helps me when I write things down like that. So that's essentially working memory, is just, it's your short-term memory, being able to get those tasks done without having to have it in front of you.
Yeah. Awesome. So tell us a little bit about the mental flexibility.
Mental flexibility is the ability basically to see things from other perspectives. So for a student, this might become more difficult when there are specifically changes in their everyday routine and their schedule. Imagine if you have a substitute and you're finding out that your students are having a rough time with that substitute. Some of them may have difficulty with mental flexibility, but it's also an idea of just generally seeing from other people's perspectives. And Katie, you and I have talked about this multiple times, is my love of Bluey, that there is an actual Bluey episode that talks about this, that Muffin and Socks are playing with Bluey and Bingo online. They're doing essentially FaceTime, and Muffin is hogging the screen, and she's not recognizing that her sister is also wanting a turn and telling her, Socks, stop hogging, instead of moving over a little bit so she can also see what's going on.
Yeah. So Kelly, David had a question in the chat about, does exception response fit under mental flexibility? For example, not enough peanut butter in the jar and you need to open a new one. Sounds to me like
mental
it
flexibility
fits.
It fits a little bit, but mental flexibility is more, you prefer creamy
And there's
and you
only
only
crunchy in
have
the cabinet.
chunky.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Or
It's a little bit
recognizing
different.
more that not everybody likes smooth peanut butter on their sandwich. Some people like chunky. Or Katie, in our household, there are 3 different people who make peanut butter and jelly sandwiches 3 very different ways. And then myself, who doesn't like peanut butter and jelly at all.
Right.
So the mental flexibility is the idea that other people may not like it the same way you do. But
Yeah.
David, that is a good example. It is very similar.
Yeah, so I think when we're talking about this mental flexibility too, we're talking about students' ability to pivot so that when something goes wrong, that they can make that, okay, adjust. So in a way, I think that is very similar, right? That I've got to adjust, right? How do I pivot what I'm doing? The peanut butter's not where it needs to be because it was empty, or I need to go to the store and get some. So having that ability to move around and make things fit where they need to fit to get the task done, right? To accomplish the
Yep.
task.
Exactly.
So let's talk about my favorite one, self-control. As soon as I
I
can
love
change.
self-control.
There we go.
I love to practice this one with my kids. It is essentially impulse control. It's that idea when you're going to the store and, you just want to buy something. Ooh, it's shiny, I need that. When really you have 5 at home, you don't need that. But for kids, it's that impulse of, I'm in class and this is very not interesting. Let me talk to my neighbor. Let me see how my friend's Memorial Day was yesterday when they're supposed to be doing a task. There are different games that can strengthen this, but it's very much just that little voice in the back of your head going, you should totally do this. Lick the knife. You can totally lick the knife. But there's also I wanted to touch on interference control, where interference control specifically is being able to block out those other conversations that are going on around you, that people in the neurodivergent community cannot always do that. Or you get the complete opposite, which is hyper-focus, where they are so much trying to block out other conversations and they're so focused on what they're doing that they don't hear when people are talking to them. So
This
that can
would
make
be
being
my
able
mother's
to,
idea of selective hearing.
yep,
Gotcha.
there's no hearing problems. We all have selective hearing.
It's just selective hearing, right? Hyper focused on the book that I'm in the middle of and, not being able to come back out of it. So,
Yep. And
all of these are challenges to executive functioning. So let's take a look back at that peanut butter and jelly example one more time, right? So the working memory would be being able to follow those different peanut butter and jelly orders without having written directions. So not having a recipe in front of you. It's just in your mind. Somebody's told you what they want, peanut butter on both sides, jelly in the middle, cut down the diagonal, done. You remember that, you're able to complete the task. Mental flexibility means being okay if that's not the way that you think a peanut butter and jelly sandwich should be made, right? You're like, no, peanut butter one side, jelly the other, cut into squares. What are you talking about? Knowing that that's okay for everybody. And then self-control is not licking the knife. Even though it looks really delicious and it's covered in peanut butter, don't lick the knife. There are consequences, right? Thinking about those consequences and knowing what you need to do. So really quickly, why do we care about executive functioning, right? Why is this even important to think about? So one is that it's connected with that social, emotional, and cognitive development for students. And Kelly, you had a lot, some ideas around this idea of the social, like how that fits in. Do you want to talk about that for a second?
absolutely. So mental functioning, as we all have kind of experienced over the years, if you're having a conversation with somebody, you're constantly disagreeing with them, you're not going, or you're not paying attention to what they're saying, the conversation's not going to go well. They're not going to want to talk to you. And that, if that's consistently happening with children, they're going to have a harder time as they get older, not being able to socialize with their peers. They're not going to have those skills to be able to work in a group and say, yeah, your idea makes sense, but my idea does as well. And having just a calm conversation about things.
Yeah.
So, but it also, mental flexibility can help strengthen those peer relations as well.
Yeah. And I think the other thing we want to think about is that these executive functioning skills, though they're not a prerequisite for school readiness, they are foundational to that. Students who have greater executive functioning skills are outperforming their peers on academic and social measures. And we know that it can support that early literacy and numeracy. But one thing we're going to come back to over and over again is that it needs to be explicitly taught. This is not an inherent trait that students are born with, that students have, or that people have. It's something that we learn to do. Think about it as a muscle, right? The brain is something that we can work and exercise. Executive functioning is part of that. And so we need to actually work that muscle and teach it different skills. So we're going to talk really quickly about who needs executive functioning support. And the first one right on that line is everybody. It's not an inherent practice. It is learned. And it's learned at different rates by different people. And so in some cases, it's a biological difference. Sometimes it's an environmental difference. Sometimes it's developmental. And I really like this picture that I stole from the Denver Post that's on the right-hand side. And you see this kind of mapping of the development of the brain over time. And we start with this 5-year-old. And they've mapped executive functioning skills to the prefrontal cortex. And we see that little box that you'll see. I think my mouse will show you, right? This little box with each one. And we see with the 5-year-old, it matches with that less mature side of the brain or developed brain. There's that executive functioning in that prefrontal cortex. And even as we get up into these 20-year-olds, we're still seeing some of those blues and greens of not being fully developed because they're still learning and they're still developing and they're still growing and they're still going to need support. There is a reason we don't rent cars to anybody under 25 because the prefrontal cortex is not fully formed until that point, right? So we have to remember that when we're talking to students, that things like multi-step directions, oral directions, they may need more support even than their peers. And Kelly's going to talk about a different group of students that also will need executive functioning support.
So specifically, the neurodivergent community needs this support. Kate, you went back a slide.
Oh, sorry. Thank
We
you.
just really wanted to see the brain again. I
like
love
the
that picture.
brains. They're so colorful. They're
It's
rainbow
pretty.
brains.
But children in the neurodivergent community specifically need these supports. As Katie said, you know, their brains are still developing, but what has actually been found is that students who are in the neurodivergent community can actually see more executive functioning challenges. And as you can see on our slide, they're actually 30% behind their peers with their prefrontal cortex development. Excuse me.
Right. So if you have a 12-year-old student, you have to think about their executive functioning is really that could be that of a 9-year-old.
Exactly. And they're two different age groups for what even developmentally from a pediatric standpoint that we're going to be expecting from them at those ages. So one thing that we really need to work on, need to recognize is the fact that these students may appear to be oppositional or misbehaving when in reality they're not even trying hard enough. No, they might be struggling with their executive functioning. They're not bad. There's nothing to fix. There's nothing wrong with them. They just need a little more help because they're not seeing things the way other people are. They're not absorbing it the same way other people are. So supporting them to do their best is the best way to help them.
Right. And they're not just going to outgrow these poor executive functioning skills. They need to be taught.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to move on and think about what are these key factors that the research is finding that in developing these executive functioning skills. So one is that we have to recognize that the genetics research that's coming out around the neurodivergent community is that it is highly linked to genetics. The probability that you, as a neurodivergent child, have a neurodivergent parent is very high. And we are still developing our skills for working with those children in our classrooms. That's why you're all here, right? Is to learn better how to support those children. It's highly likely their parents didn't get the support that they needed, and they need support still in their executive functioning. But they need, the students, your current students, need those role models in showing them how to have good executive functioning skills. So they need those relationships with adults, whether it's somebody at home, whether it's a teacher at school. They need to know how to do these things. What do they look like with adults? And they need safe, stable environments to play and explore. So we talk a lot in engineering about failure. We want kids to fail. They need the same chances with executive functioning to take those risks and possibly fail. And they need this engagement in the social, emotional, cognitive, and physical activities that will support the executive functioning development. So that's what we're going to move into next, is we're going to talk about what exactly can we as educators do to support executive functioning development. And how we're going to go through this is we've broken these down by grade bands, and Kelly's going to help us with some of these more kind of general summaries of what executive functioning support should look like at that grade band. And then I'm going to share some of the ways that the engineering classroom through Youth Engineering Solutions and Engineering is Elementary can really scaffold that even further and include some of those very common activities. And so we start with our pre-K. Oh, I think Kelly. Oh, you froze for a second there, Kelly. Try again.
Okay. So we're specifically going to go back to Bluey again because I love Bluey just for the things that it shows on TV for kids. But one thing that Katie and I talked about previously was the fact that there is a specific episode where two of Bluey's friends, Indy and Rusty, are playing house. And they suddenly get up and decide they need to go to work. And they both get up and start arguing about who is staying home with the baby. And Indy is has lived in a household where her mother is the one who works and her father stays home with them. Whereas Rusty's parents are the opposite, that his dad works and his mom stays home. And they get into a whole argument about mom stays home, dad stays home, and decide to go play with other kids. And in the end, find that nobody wants to play with them the way that they're playing, decide to play together. And the solution is it's Saturday, no one is going to work. So that
Work
specific
around.
imaginative play, it's Saturday, it's fine. Here, have a cup of tea. They specifically were not exhibiting their mental flexibility at the beginning of the episode. And by the end, they have found a way that works for both of them. They're showing that they both come from these different households and can come together. They can have different viewpoints, but they're also doing a little bit of storytelling in that too, of how their own home is and playing that out. The other thing we can do, matching and sorting games, matching colors versus shapes. And there's actually been a multitude of studies that show that singing and just songs in general can help with learning. My own son struggles with finding his shoes in the morning, getting all of his tasks done when he gets in the morning. But if you ask that kid what the body systems are, he can name them all off in song.
Nice.
Because that is something he learned from watching a video on YouTube. It's a song about body systems. He does the same thing with multiplication. These songs have helped him to memorize these different facts that you would not expect a 6-year-old to know.
Right. This is why most people can sing all of the states from that state song, but have to actually sing it to be able to name all of the states, right? We've got that little trick for our working memory to bring it up. You've got to get the melody going with it, right? Yeah. So instead of me actually talking to you about all of these things, I'm going to let you watch this little video. It's very short, of our We Engineering. They're going to sing you our engineering song. So that's one of them. But I want you to look for examples of these other components for pre-K coming through. Oops, wrong button.
My friends, it's
Wrong
time.
button. Sorry, hold on one second.
My friends, it's time. It's time for our favorite song. We are engineers. We are engineers. We can solve problems 'cause we are engineers. First we explore, then we create, improve to make it better 'cause engineers are great.
So when you're watching along, you're seeing some of these things happening, right? We set the context in all of our units with some storytelling, and in this case with the puppet, this imaginative play. They're matching and sorting as they go through their activities, and we saw them singing their engineering song. And let me tell you, having been in the classroom with not this particular unit, but our kindergartners who also have a song, they love to sing along with the engineering song. So speaking of kindergarten, let's take a trip forward and think about lower elementary. So Kelly, how is lower elementary different than our pre-K? And let me real quick preface with lower elementary, we mean kindergarten through 2nd grade-ish, right? There's some blurry boundaries there.
So as we're saying, card games, board games, increasing the speed of them, expecting these kids to know, my turn is done, now it's your turn.
Right.
And moving through memory games, again, the matching games. I love playing memory with kids. If you get a really good set of cards, they really get into it. But it practices that working memory as well as that impulse control, because when you're sitting with them, they not only are having to remember what cards you flipped when it's not their turn, but waiting for their turn and not jumping in to take their turn. Candyland's really good for that. It's the cards and remembering where on the board they need to go. But having them have more activities with more rules to them that they're having to remember. One example that I often use is with baseball. You don't want a child on third base and they're about to go run for home, but it's not their time to run because now the game is done. Or a child who is into swimming, diving before the gun goes off.
Right. Don't run the wrong way around the bases. You
Yep.
got to know the rules. Yeah, and I think that comes into play too with a lot of these engineering activities that we do in these ask phases. So I have some photos up there from our pumpkin pollinators unit, which is done in second grade. And we've added this science dimension to this idea of matching and memory and card games by having them really think about what is the structure of a pumpkin flower and what is the function of a pollinator. And so they're looking again then at the structure of the pollinator. So we're getting those cross-cutting concepts brought in here. And they're trying to match the pollinators that would be best suited for the function of pollinating that flower. So there we go. Let's think about upper elementary. So how are we changing this executive functioning support to get to that upper elementary student? So about 3rd through 5th grade now.
So again, we're giving them more to do and having more expectations from them that at this age, they should be able to come into your classroom, put their lunchbox away. And if you say you have work over here, you're going to complete it and then put it away in this box. They should be able to do these things. But the ways that we can support them are, again, playing games. I love play therapy. I love things that encourage through play because kids don't always realize they're learning when they do this too.
Yeah.
But playing games like Uno, playing a game called Speed that I know Katie knows, but some other people may not, but you're basically
Fast
similar to
response
solitaire. Yep. It's very fast paced, but you need to be watching your own cards, your players' cards, as well as the cards in the center. So you're getting that tracking, the monitoring what's going on, as well as remembering what order cards are supposed to go in so that you're not putting the wrong ones down and you're having to take it back and you've now messed yourself up.
Yeah. And go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
I think with engineering, when we look at it, what is engineering but a puzzle? We have a problem, we have to solve it, and we give kids a certain amount of materials to make a solution. So we see at the bottom some of our students working with materials. On the left, they're building a filter to capture plastic pollution. On the right, they're building a magnetic dog door system. So they're using magnets to open and close a door. But we also, again, in those ask phases, and I'm going to hopefully I can do this and mute it quickly. There we go. We're seeing some of our students here engaging in one of those environment monitoring games. Now, in this case, it's, hopefully, I don't know if you guys can hear that. Loud thunder from my end, sorry. We're getting students here interacting with one another. They're modeling an intersection here because they're going to be designing communication devices, wearable communication devices, but they're trying to understand how cars, pedestrians, bicyclists, skateboarders all interact at an intersection and how many collisions they might have as they're moving through. They're not trying to have a collision. However, sometimes it just happens. So let's talk about those teenagers, right? Your middle schoolers and high schoolers, because I think then seems like we start really giving them some explicit instruction on these executive functioning skills.
Yes. So students in your classroom, if you give them a list written down of things that you want them to do for a task, they should be able to work in a group and not have to be asking many questions about what do I do next? What do I do next? And a lot of the sports, because again, it's reinforcing those rules. It's reinforcing the impulse control. Study guides. I love study guides for kids because it allows other people to be able to help them outside of the classroom. But I want to focus a lot on that positive self-talk because very often kids are told, especially with the neurodivergent community, you just need to try harder.
Yeah.
And the problem is a lot of these kids are trying as hard as they can, but it's not showing because they are not having these executive functioning skills working to the potential that these kids need. So encouraging them with they've worked hard and you're recognizing that they are working hard actually can help them in the classroom because it's focused more on what they're doing as opposed to innate skill.
Yeah. So it's process over product. It's less about what you made at the end, the grade that you got. It's more about the effort that you put in and the growth that you're making, that you've improved, that you've done something. And I think that connects really well with engineering because none of our units have a test at the end that a student needs to get a grade on. It's about how well they engage in this engineering design process, how well they iterate, how well they persist through failure and engage in all of these practices. But sometimes they still need some support. So for example, in our middle school unit, you'll see here on the right, this is one of the planning pages. It's part of their investigate, but they're thinking about this particular investigation that they're going to do and who's going to do it with very clear and specific steps, right? This has been broken down for them to help them organize not only their own activity, but their activity as a group. That whole group dynamic, right? As we start getting into these older kids, we go back to what Kelly said about your students who struggle with their executive functioning may also then struggle with their social skills because they're, not picked up immediately by groups of students to have lots of friends and interact. They may also need that support when they're communicating, arguing, negotiating, all of these key skills that we want in STEM classes. They may need just a little bit of extra support. And so we want to take a look next at giving you a teacher toolbox. And what are some of these things that you can have in your arsenal to support your students specifically in the classroom? So not just these fun games, those are part of it, but also what are these specific scaffolds, accommodations, and modifications that you might put into place to help these students? And so I want to really quickly differentiate between those three words, right? Because they mean different things. And I want to make sure you all are understanding the way that we are using them. The first is that it's a scaffold. A scaffold is designed to fade. So think about a building. If you have a tall building that you're building, you will have scaffolding to keep it supported until it's strong enough. This is the same for your students. You want them to reach a higher zone of proximal development than they're at. We need to scaffold them. So this might be helping students think about those multi-step directions by giving them very clear graphic organizers and things like that to get them there. An accommodation is something that is not necessarily meant to fade, but allowing a student with a need to be on that grade appropriate level. And these will often look very similar to your scaffolds, but they're used differently, right? They're not meant to necessarily fade. That student may just always need a timer. Some of us just always need to set a 5-minute timer and pick up as many things as we can in the living room until we're clean, right? That's just something that some people may always need. Your students may just always need to have a timer on their desk that they only get 5 minutes to complete this task. And then a modification is when we actually make a change to the goals are there. So allowing for students to have extra time or an alternative assessment. And so Kelly had some suggestions for these scaffolds and accommodations and modifications that you might incorporate as part of your toolbox, right?
Yep. So we talked about the memory game, which most people have played. It's a bunch of cards and there's matching ones. Card games specifically, because it's all about turn taking and remembering the rules. But my favorite that I cannot take 100% credit for this one is Simon Says. That anybody who has played understands that the rules of the game, if Simon says jump, you jump. If Simon does not say, Simon says jump, and you jump, no, you're out. So that encourages that impulse control to not jump when you just hear jump. And I've actually seen some success with children who have difficulty in the classroom that they turn and talk to their buddies. And I actually do this with my own son, that if they are having difficulty not talking to their peers, is to encourage them to play Simon Says with themselves. And the part of the game that makes them lose is that impulse control voice in their head going, talk to your buddy. Because they can stop and say, no, Kelly doesn't say. Kelly did not say, Kelly says we're going to talk. And I've had multiple children say to me, I did try that and it worked. And I'm talking about 6, 7, 8-year-old kids, not teenagers. where impulse control is a little more difficult just due to maturity wise for the younger ages. So I really encourage practice playing Simon Says with the kids. They'll like it too.
So one of the things as you're talking, I was thinking about, Kelly, was the game 24 challenge. Was that what it was called? Those cards
Yes.
that you had to add to 24 and you had to be quick.
They still have that. It's not called 24 challenge anymore, but I do know what you're talking about. I love 24 challenge.
Yeah, I hated it.
I love it. Okay.
My mental math was never strong enough for that one. I needed more processing time for it. But I think if you can get the developmentally right level and have kids working with other kids at their same level, that feels like a really good, right? That working memory, getting it going, jogging it, making it happen, and generally in a fun way that kids are really interested in.
Mm-hmm.
So let's take a look at some of these more specific classroom scaffolds and accommodations and modifications. And so one of these big key pieces is making schedules known. We want our students, this is going to support their working memory because they'll have these written instructions and guides. And so you'll see on the right-hand side, we have borrowed this from a group out of UT Austin, specifically Brie Jimenez. This is from her modifications of the Engineering is Elementary curriculum. She works with students with multiple disabilities. So your students who might have cognitive impairments, developmental delays, they might have physical impairments and be in wheelchairs. And she's doing engineering with them. And she's working with teachers to help with that. And so this is one of the modifications or accommodations, really, that she's put into place to help them. They have written instructions. They know what's coming at each piece of the lesson, and they're checking it off as they go through it to really help them stay on task. It's supporting their mental flexibility because it's previewing those transitions. They know that when they're done with this particular piece, this is what we're moving on to next, and then on to the next thing. And we're helping them with their self-control by supporting all of this planning. They can plan as they're going along. We're showing them the plan for the day. We're not just willy-nilly going through these engineering activities, but we are planning. And so then the next one is making the invisible visible. And this is one of those key pieces. This is where we go back to that peanut butter and jelly sandwich again. Those extra, right, multiplied by 5 steps, we got from 3 to 15. There were so many invisible things that needed to be accounted for. And for some of your students, that needs to be made clear. They're not going to just interpret what you said and turn it into those 15 steps. They need it spelled out for them. So how's this supporting working memory? Well, we're clarifying expectations, right? There's nothing worse than a set of vague instructions to write an argument about X. Okay, how many paragraphs does it need to be? Or how many pages does it need to be? How many points do I need to make, right? How many points of this do I need to argue? Am I arguing one point the whole time? Or should each paragraph be a different point? So sometimes people think of that as you're overthinking it. It's like, well, no, I've learned along the way that I need to know these details in order to have all of these pieces in place to write a good argument. We're supporting mental flexibility by having students share their thinking and make others' ideas available to negotiate. So they need to hear that other people are thinking something different than them. And we see this a lot when we're asking students to collaborate in these engineering environments, because we're really saying like, hey, you all have different imagined ideas from that engineering design process. Now you need to put them together into a plan, and you may not agree, and we need to figure out how to negotiate that. And it's supporting self-control by creating clear expectations. And so Kelly mentioned earlier that like emotional regulation happens when they're frustrated, right? When they've got that overwhelm of too much going on. And I think even us as adults have had this experience when too many things are flying at you at one time and those cortisol levels go shooting up. We have a much harder time not reacting. And your students are having the same thing. So when we make those clear expectations, we lower that task anxiety, right? And we lower that level of frustration that they're experiencing so they can show us that they understand the science, the engineering, the math, the technology, and not just their deficit in executive functioning. We don't want to measure kids' executive functioning deficits. We want to scaffold, make that bridge for them so that they can show us how talented they can be in that science, technology, engineering, and math. And then the last one I'm going to share is this idea of involve the students in creating the system. And so what I really like about, especially at our middle school level, we see here, this is work from a student in one of our upcoming middle school units that will be available in the fall. They're designing landing pads for drone delivery. The students are deciding what the criteria and constraints are and helping to shape the problem. And so they've got this, we see this down there, supporting self-control. They're self-setting their expectations to increase that buy-in, to get kids to care for ownership, for agency about what's going to happen in the engineering challenge. But those criteria and constraints need to be coming from a group consensus. Every kid can't have their own. We have to decide as a class what we're going to do. And so there's that mental flexibility that although this piece might be important to me, it may not be important to the person next to me. So if we look at this student's examples, right? It needs to be portable. Well, maybe your neighbor doesn't think it needs to be portable. They think it needs to just be there and be ready to use. And it supports their working memory because again, there's that value, right? It's more likely to stick around when you care about it, right? We get a little bit of that, oh, this is important. I care about this. I'm attentive. It's staying in that prefrontal cortex, and it's not being filed away somewhere and forgotten. Going forward. I don't know why it keeps doing that to me today. So we wanted to end by revisiting that sandwich metaphor. So if I were to design some scaffolding for a student who needed executive functioning support to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich for me, first, we'd make sure that as a class, we decide what makes the criteria for a good sandwich. How are we evaluating that, right? Does it get peanut butter and jelly on both sides? How are we going to cut it? I'm going to keep those instructions really direct and clear. And I've added that to this checklist on the right, where you can see there's little boxes so they can check off each material as they gather it. I know which ones I've got. Then they can check off each step as they go through with very clear directions. We don't want 15 directions. That's overwhelming. But we do need to be clear about what those expectations are. So meeting them somewhere in the middle. And then we just wanted to mention there's still this advocacy need. We need to do certain things to make sure that our students who need executive functioning support get it. One of the big ones is we need early intervention policies that don't kick out the quote bad kids from our pre-K and Head Start programs because of their poor executive functioning skills. They're still little. They're 4 or 5 years old, 6 years old. Their prefrontal cortex is right. Remember, we saw that red spot. Their self-control, their working memory, and their mental flexibility are still really new, and we need to support it, not punish it. We're not going to beat these things into kids. We need to give them the scaffolds to get there. And that means not just kicking them out because they can't behave. And we need professional learning for educators. You guys are already on taking up this first step. Congratulations. Step 1. Sharing it with your friends, right? Making sure that everybody gets a little bit of support here. And then thinking about the ways, again, you heard Kelly and I do this throughout. We took some of the things that she was talking about that seemed disconnected from curricula, and we connected it to the curricula. We made those unsiloing the executive functioning supports from the curricular activity. We can do those two things together. And that takes us to our end. So we will open it up for questions. You can put them in the chat. You can raise your hand and we will see you and you can talk to us. But as you're thinking about it, and David, I see your question, your comment, and I will get to it in just a second. We have our yes.mos.org. So all of the resources from the curriculum are available free and online. You can get those at yes.mos.org, which we see right here.